Have you ever wondered what you'd do if the world as you knew it came crashing down overnight? For one family living a seemingly perfect life in the city, that nightmare became a horrifying reality. This is their story, a story of survival, betrayal, and a terror they never saw coming. The Williams family was like any other. David, the father, worked as an accountant, spending his days balancing spreadsheets and his evenings catching up on his favorite crime dramas. Sarah, his wife, was a school teacher who always made time for her students and her two kids, Emma and Noah. Emma was a spirited 15-year-old with a love for art, while 10-year-old Noah spent most of his time buried in comic books about superheroes. They lived in a modest apartment in the heart of the city, surrounded by the constant buzz of urban life. Life was good, predictable. But everything changed on a chilly autumn evening. David was stuck in traffic, the usual cacophony of honking horns and impatient drivers filling the air. His radio buzzed with static before a frantic news anchor's voice broke through. "We interrupt this broadcast with urgent news. Reports of violent attacks are coming in from across the city. Authorities are urging everyone to stay indoors." At first, David thought it was a joke or some kind of overblown story, but as he glanced out the window, he saw chaos erupting. People were running, screaming. A man tackled another in the middle of the street, biting into his neck like a wild animal. Blood sprayed onto the pavement. David's stomach dropped. This wasn't a joke. He fumbled for his phone and called Sarah. She picked up after the first ring. "David, what's going on?" "The news is saying, lock the doors. Keep Emma and Noah inside. Don't open the door for anyone." "I'm coming home right now," he said, his voice shaking. David's commute home felt like an eternity. The streets were gridlocked, and every few minutes he'd catch a glimpse of something horrific. People with glazed, vacant eyes tearing into anyone who crossed their path. He abandoned his car and ran the rest of the way, dodging the chaos around him. When he finally reached the apartment, he found Sarah barricading the door with furniture. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," David replied, hugging her tightly. "But we're not safe out there." That night, the family huddled in the living room, the TV casting a flickering glow. The news provided little comfort. The reporters called it an outbreak, though no one seemed to know what was causing it. All they knew was that the infected attacked indiscriminately, spreading whatever it was like wildfire. Days turned into weeks, and the city descended further into chaos. The power grid failed, plunging their apartment into darkness. Supplies ran low. The once bustling streets were now eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant scream or the guttural growl of the infected. David knew they couldn't stay there forever. The food was almost gone, and the apartment building wasn't as secure as they'd hoped. One night, after the kids had fallen asleep, he sat down with Sarah to discuss their options. "We need to leave," he said. "There's nothing left here. If we stay, we'll starve." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Where do we go?" David pulled out a crumpled map. "I heard rumors about a safe zone outside the city. It's a long shot, but it's our only chance." The next morning they packed what little they had: canned food, a flashlight, a baseball bat, and a knife. David carried the map and a crowbar, while Sarah held Noah's hand tightly. Emma clutched her sketchbook, refusing to leave it behind. The journey through the city was like walking through a nightmare. Cars were abandoned in the streets, their windows shattered. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air. They moved cautiously, sticking to alleyways and avoiding open spaces. At one point, they stumbled upon a small grocery store. It had been looted, but David insisted they check for anything useful. As they searched, a noise from the back made them freeze. It was a low, guttural groan. David motioned for them to stay quiet, gripping the crowbar tightly. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision, and then it lunged. The infected man was gaunt, his skin pale and peeling. David swung the crowbar with all his strength, the sound of metal meeting bone echoing through the store. The creature collapsed, but the noise had attracted others. More groans filled the air. "Run!" David shouted. The family sprinted down the street, their hearts pounding. They didn't stop until they were sure they weren't being followed. That night, they camped in an abandoned office building, taking turns keeping watch. As the days passed, the family faced more challenges. They encountered other survivors, some of whom were friendly, others desperate and dangerous. Trust was a rare commodity. Once, a man tried to steal their supplies, only to be scared off by David's crowbar. But the worst moment came when Noah fell sick. At first, it seemed like a common cold, but his fever worsened. Sarah was inconsolable, cradling him as he shivered. They didn't have medicine, and the nearest hospital was overrun with infected. One night, as David sat by the window, staring at the empty streets below, Emma approached him. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked at her, his heart breaking. "I don't know, but we have to try." Eventually, they reached the outskirts of the city. The air felt cleaner, the distant sounds of chaos replaced by the rustling of trees. But the journey was far from over. The safe zone was still miles away, and the path ahead was uncertain. As they stood at the edge of the forest, David turned to his family. "We've made it this far," he said. "We can't give up now." Their fight for survival is only beginning. But one thing is certain. In a world overrun by the infected, the greatest battle isn't against the monsters outside. It's against the fear threatening to tear them apart. Hit subscribe and stay tuned. The nightmare is far from over.